definitely subject to discuss. And later in the presentation, we're going to actually walk you through controls that are available, native controls that are available to you to harden your environment to help mitigate some of that risk. So getting right into it, what I'd like to start with is just a discussion about Microsoft and the security that they provide. Microsoft's cyber defense strategy, they have about $15 billion and is growing every year invested in their cloud infrastructure. Ben and I were talking about it this morning, and the roadmap looks like they may double that within the next couple of years. So it becomes critical that they invest in security architecture aligned with that enterprise architecture they're deploying. And to that end, they spend about $1 billion a year on security alone. They bring more than 200 cloud services, all near and dear to our heart, Office 365, OneDrive, the whole Azure platform. And in order to provide security, they operate a cyber defense operations center. It's 24/7. They are monitoring all of the controls that they have put in place and anything that you enable. They have a SOC that is looking at those controls and helping you understand what threats are there on the landscape. That ecosystem for Microsoft includes 50 security experts and data scientists that are connected to over 3,500 security professionals within Microsoft. So Microsoft is the largest security organization in the world. The question for us is, are we taking advantage of all of the tools that are available? And to that end, I'm going to show you how they protect you. I'm going to let this load up first. A lot of animations in this slide. So if we start from the bottom and work our way up, these are all the services that Microsoft offers. So whether it's Azure and Azure Active Directory in the cloud or on-premise or Office 365, both their platform and infrastructure as a service, or the millions of devices that we all are running in our environments, they have built security controls to be able to protect them. So if you look at the next layer up, conditional access, cloud app security, rights management, security center, Office 365 advanced threat protection, Windows updates, all of these components, this layer, then feeds up into their CDOC. So they have a malware protection center, they have a cyber hunting team, a security response team. All of these teams are providing dashboards back to us and monitoring those dashboards to look at emergent threats. Last week, Ben and our consulting team, the data center team and security team, went through 2 days of intense training on Microsoft Security Trifecta. Now today we're going to focus on Office 365 Enterprise and all of the components, security components that you can overlay to protect all of the communications and collaboration tools that you're utilizing. In that trifecta is also their Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite, as well as Windows 10 Enterprise. We'll save that for another webinar in the future. And just focus on Office 365. And if you look down below, you'll see Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection, Threat Intelligence, Advanced Security Management, and Security and Compliance Center, which is going to be the centerpiece of today's webinar. A dashboard where you can go and find your secure score, meaning how many controls have we enabled, what kind of score are we getting out of a baseline score are we getting against a target score, and how do we enable some of the other controls that are available to us. So that'll be a little bit later. So right now we're going to focus on Office 365 Enterprise as the first leg in the security trifecta. I'm going to turn things over to Ben. Let me just give him control. Yes, I'm a chief technologist and we'll drop down.
You just stop sharing and then.
Yeah, I'm trying. Okay, Ben.
Just a moment. Having challenges as well.
As we go along, don't forget, please use the chat window if you have any questions as we go, and Rebecca will raise her hand and make sure we're aware of them.
Let me know if you can see the screen.
You got it, Ben.
Okay. So there's two sides to every story. With Office 365, there's a lot of good that can come from it. And Office 365 is the #1 collaboration tool for business. There's a number of components within it that are leveraged every day by each and every one of you, whether it's email services, SharePoint, OneDrive, Delve, Microsoft Project or Visio, Yammer. There's a lot of things in there that, from a business perspective, add a lot of value. Office 365 is great because you can use it anywhere on any device. The time to deployment and delivery of it is fairly quick. It's a software as a service platform, so from an IT standpoint, there's not a lot to have to stand up. There's data and stuff that needs to be migrated into it, and controls put around the identity of who's accessing that data, but you're not deploying multiple server farms anymore within the environment. So it gives IT a lot of flexibility. It also transfers a lot of the ownership and risk of running those environments to Microsoft. They are maintaining those servers and those platforms for you, and they're always keeping it up to date, so there's no more patching per se on that. Some of the bad things. So as the platform has gotten bigger and the number of users and businesses have increased on it, there's a number of threats that Microsoft has to deal with. So 80 billion inbound messages come into Office 365 every month. That accounts for 31% of all core business email. So Microsoft's handling majority of the email worldwide at this point. Out of that 80 billion, there's 55 billion spam and bulk emails that are coming into users' mailboxes. So there's a lot of threats potentially within that environment. And malware has been up 600% in the past year. Office 365 is becoming more of a target since it's the biggest platform in the world right now for delivering email. So most security breaches are occurring when attackers steal a user's identity. You're going to start seeing a common theme here around identity because as you start moving out of hosting things on premise, a firewall is no longer your true perimeter of this. So what we're seeing from an industry perspective is 91% of cyber attacks are starting with phishing email, which is a pretty large percentage. So that's the #1 way that hackers are getting into systems. 15% of those victims fall victim a second time. So there's reoccurrence that's occurring on there. Hackers or these malicious actors are pretty good at trying to trick people into getting in there. 81% of the hacking-related breaches use compromised credentials. So they're not coming in necessarily through an exploit on the system from patching necessarily. They're using the identity of that user that they've gotten. And then 75% of individuals in organizations use only 3 or 4 different passwords across all of their accounts. So it's not just Office 365 identity that you have to worry about, or your on-premise identity. It's all the other software services that business users use every single day. So based off of that, you can see that social engineering is the #1 method that people are able to get in. Phishing is a huge percentage of that. Sometimes they attach links in there for a malicious downloader, and that accounts for 29% of it. There's a number of different Java exploits that people are able to do to be able to steal identities from systems once they've logged in. And then there's Office exploits, so whether that's a macro that's running within a Word application that is sent as an attachment or other Trojans. So software vendors are incorporating stronger security into their products, so hackers, to be able to get around that, are absolutely going after users' identity to be able to log in. So identity is the new security perimeter. So Active Directory for administrators control all of the assets. So this right here is a combination of both cloud services, on-premise servers, devices, mobile devices that are coming in, users who might be on-premise or traveling remotely. There's a lot of different variables of where people are accessing data. And being in the cloud, you only have control necessarily over your own internal firewall. So what happens then? How are they getting it? They're sending someone a link. They're directing that user to go browse to a web page. They're capturing those credentials. And then those malicious actors are coming back and taking that identity to grab any data that they can, whether it's modifying documents or impersonating a user or disrupting business operations. They're taking that information and they're using that user's identity. And it really is only just one small mistake that leads to it. These guys are very smart. They know how to portray an internal user. They watch emails. They learn about the environment. They learn about the business that they're attacking, and they will come and use that information to present themselves as someone. So this is over to you, Michael. Michael?
Yep, and I'm just going to let you click through the slides.
Okay.
We don't have to go back and forth. Go to the next slide, please. So can it happen to you often when we're out talking to our clients? The question is, why us? Why would hackers want to attack us? Do we have information they want? And to be honest with you, it's from a hacker's perspective, go back, Ben. From a hacker's perspective, you're a target, and it's low cost to them. It's the attempt is not like trying to go on site or a technical attack that requires a lot of overhead, a lot of cost to develop an exploit. It's basically developing a platform to deliver a message to clients and hope that they give up their credentials. So one of our clients, I'm just going to give you a quick case study. This is a mid-sized organization. They have 650 users across several states. So they're not just located here in New York. One of their C-level, an executive VP in their organization, had a compromised account, received a phishing, what we call spear phishing, targeted attack against C-level people. His account was compromised, and they leveraged that account to send out an email, because it's going to look like it comes right from him, to everybody else in the organization, which led to dozens of credentials being collected by the hackers. So now armed with all of those credentials, and once we recognized that the email sent from him wasn't actually sent from him, it required a reset of all the accounts, passwords across the organization, many of whom in some of the other states are not under their Active Directory domains. So it was a much more manual process to communicate to them and go through the process of changing those passwords for them. So it took a couple days to get everything sorted out. That said, what can happen? Well, as a result of this, it's not just about having your email, access to your email, and that compromise. It's what we can do with the credentials. As an ethical hacking team, we are doing phishing campaigns for our clients all of the time to test the effectiveness of their security awareness training program. Once a hacker gets a credential, there are a number of things they can do. First of all, as you can see on the slide, you can configure mail forwarding. And in this case, for one of their, again, it was a VP in the organization, they were able to leverage their credentials to enable mail forwarding. And over 2,000 emails out of their inbox were forwarded to a Google account. And if, as you know, mail forwarding doesn't show up in your sent box. It's under the radar. And what they were doing is they were using a keyword search in the inbox for anything that had financial information and forwarding only those emails to the Google account before we were able to prevent it. The second thing is, if we have 80 credentials, or if we have Office 365 credentials, they're tied to your Active Directory domain. So effectively have 80 credentials. If you have a VPN group set up to be able to VPN into your network, or if your wireless is Radius and AD integrated, and you have not set up an OU so that only domain devices can join that wireless, I can either VPN into your network, or I can sit in the parking lot and connect into your network and then expand my presence within the organization. The other thing is the admin for their SharePoint site gave up their credentials, and those credentials were not unique to it wasn't a unique administrator account, it was part of their user account had admin privileges to the SharePoint site. So they effectively had admin privileges on the SharePoint site. So you can see that giving up credentials, part of the educational process is the understanding within the organization of what it means for credentials to be hijacked. Now, it's extremely important to train our people. As part of the conversation here, we'd be amiss if we didn't suggest that training is your first line of defense. As you can see from the metrics here, from an initial baseline for how prone the organization is, as they go through training, 12 months later, the risk reduction is exponential. It goes from 27% of users are phishing prone to 2.1% 12 months later. I was at a symposium last year that an FBI analyst was there talking about training, and his suggestion was that, and it was a bit facetious, but all of your security budget should be dedicated toward training your people, because they are your first line of defense against the number one attack kill chain. We're not going to suggest that. There are a lot of other things that need to be enabled in order to provide layers of security within the organization. But this is an important one, getting people trained. That said, it's not enough. Training people, it still relies on that human factor. Will someone in the course of a busy day click on a link, enter their credentials without thinking about it, and we can't maintain security being dependent on that. So we're going to get into the actual security hardening portion of this and talk about how you can leverage 365 Secure Score to be able to determine where your baseline security is now in 365 and what controls can be enabled in order to move forward and increase your security defenses. So where do you go? Let's, first of all, I'm not sure if everybody is aware, but in the Office 365 Admin Center, under, as you see at the bottom there, Admin Centers, when you drop that down, there will be an admin console called Security and Compliance. That is one of the places you can go to look at your health, the health of the organization at 365 Security, and that's where Secure Score is located. Now, OneDrive has an admin center, and there are SharePoint admin centers, Exchange admin centers. All of them have additional protections and security measures that can be enabled, but the point dashboard you want to go to is the Security and Compliance dashboard for all of this. So Secure Score, as you can see on the screen there, this is what it will look like, and Ben's going to do a demo of the Security and Compliance dashboard in a couple minutes here. But as you can see, you will get what your score is against a measurement. At this, there's a slider at the bottom. You can see that you can get a maximum score of 450. That slider, you can determine where do we want to be. You can measure yourself. You can set a target for yourself. That will determine how many actions you want to enable, how many controls you want to go in and review and potentially enable to hit that target score. So this is the best place to go to see where you are against security. I'm going to tell you at the bottom right, you can't see it, but that compare your score, that will show your score compared to a baseline, two factors. One is organizations of your size. So if you're in the 100 to 200 range, it'll tell you how other organizations are doing on their scores as an average. And then it will show you the average across all organizations. We were surprised. Microsoft has upped their game in the past year. This this whole hardening and a lot of these controls, some of them are relatively new. When we first started reviewing this, the average score is 30. So with a potential of 450 points, the average across the whole world is 30, meaning that very few people have gone in and taken advantage of this dashboard and the controls that you can enable. So as I mentioned, when you go in and look at that score, you can set your target score, and you can see the number of actions grows exponentially as you have a higher target score. The number of actions you need to take in your queue will increase accordingly. Down below, you'll see one of the controls, enable MFA for global administrators, and we were surprised to learn that very few people knew that MFA for global administrators, multi-factor authentication, is part of your base package. There's no additional cost to enabling multi-factor authentication for administrators. Here you can see that by clicking on the Learn More, you can go into another screen that shows you how many global admins you have and who they are, and you can actually just click a button and it will enable multi-factor authentication. Now, we don't recommend that. There are some choices to be made. How do you want to deliver that multi-factor authentication? What's the impact? As you go through each of these controls, you clearly want to review them, understand the impact, understand how it will help you with remediating risk, and then make a conscious decision as to what you're going to enable and what you're not going to. And to help you with that, what we've done is Ben and I and the security team have gone through the complete control list. And I'm just for a second, Ben, I guess I do need to take control for a second. I want to show you how we got there. So I'm going to share out my desktop again. And this is coming up. This is a downloadable list. Can you see my screen okay, Ben? Let's see it coming up.
Still loading.
Gotcha. So in the security and compliance dashboard, on the dashboard itself, there is an export function to export all of the controls, all those that action list. Yes.
We are not seeing.
Okay.
We're seeing Skype phone calls.
I know why. Yep. Come on. So this is the list. Now the first 4 columns we've added. If you look at the control list that you download, you'll see that Microsoft has stack ranked the controls themselves. They have their own ranking. We took a couple of other factors into consideration. For instance, is there a cost associated with enabling the control? And generally outside of labor. For instance, if you want to enable multi-factor authentication for all your users, there'll be an additional cost of $2 per user per month. The controls break into 3 control types: behavioral controls, configuration controls, and then review controls. So we've sorted all of the controls, and we'll make this available as well. And we've stack ranked them ourselves. So what do we consider the do first controls based on risk, cost, and the effort to implement the controls? Is it a high degree of effort, a lot of planning that's going to go into it? Is it going to have a large degree of effect on the end user population? Or is it low? Is it a checkbox, basically? So we've gone through, we have 5 behavioral, we have 11 configuration controls, or 12. The ones in this dark orange, or the orange here, these are ones where there was some excessive labor costs or a lot of decisions to be made. So there are some optional controls that we include. When we get back to the slide deck, you'll see how we put those optional controls in. And then the last control type is review. Microsoft's expectation is that when you log in, you will go and weekly look at things like, do I have multiple failures? Do I have sign-ins from unknown sources? from multiple geographies. You're reviewing these reports every week to determine, are you under attack? Have there been breaches? Have there been any changes to administrators? Just going through and looking at all of these reports that are there. So that's how we got there in determining what we consider do first security controls. So Ben, I'm going to turn it back over to you now.
All right, just a moment. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the controls that are within there, and Michael showed you the different options within this. There are a couple options that are outside of the baseline, and one of those is multi-factor authentication for all users. This is an add-on product for Office 365, but it basically allows you to ensure that a user always has to verify something outside of their password. It's a really nice interface. There's multiple options with it. You're able to have an app within your phone that you can click approve on. There's an option for enforcing the user to type in a code that's displayed on their phone so that they're always make sure that they're actually in front of their device when someone is actually logging in. There's an option for a text message. There's also an option for a phone call. Microsoft also offers advanced threat protection, and basically it's a pretty intense tool that takes attachments that come inbound, opens those attachments in a Azure virtual machine, and then they perform some analysis in that environment to determine if that attachment is doing anything malicious. Are there macros within that environment that are making callouts? Are there registry changes that are occurring? Is there any sort of external communication that's unexpected? So it's really looking at those zero-day exploits out there that antivirus vendors are not able to catch because it's new. And 96% of all new malware is actually more on a undetected at the first time it comes through. So it's a pretty large percentage. There's an advanced security management console available in Office 365 E5 plans. It lets you really get into being able to see suspicious activity within the Office 365 environment, as well as being able to dive in, seeing what's basically creating policies around there. So if something is occurring in there, you're getting a full alert on digital loss prevention or data exfiltration, and being able to see some of those. And then there's DLP policies. So how do you ensure that your data stays with you? It's not exposed externally or forwarded on outside of your environment. So we're going to go into the demo piece of the Office 365 Secure Score. So the first thing I wanted to show you was that when you log into Office 365, your console may look like this or might look slightly different. But using the tile pane up in the top left, if you go down to the Admin Center, you'll be able to get to the Admin Control section down below. And that will give you an option to be able to, clicking the link here, it's not moving yet. This is the section down below that Michael was talking about from the Admin Center. So from here, you can get right to the Security and Compliance Center. Once that is up, you'll see a few different options across the left-hand side. There's a section on alerts. There's a section on data loss prevention, data governance, threat management, search and investigation, reports, and assurance. On the main dashboard, if you scroll down, you will see your Microsoft Secure Score, what it currently is, and you also have some other links back to some of the same sections over on the left side. By clicking on this link here, it'll send you over to the Secure Score site, which is securescore.microsoft.com, where you'll be able to go through and just take a look at what your current security rating is for your controls. So in this demo tenant here, we have a current security score of 68 out of 364. What does that mean? So as we scroll down, this is the slider that Michael was showing you. Basically, this is the target score of 353 that has been set. These actions cover basic and include some defense and depth for choices. But you can also trim this down and basically get to a point where you might be able to feel like you're going to get some good value out of here. So this basic settings, for example, these settings are high value and low user impact. So it's not going to be very impactful for your users, but you're going to really harden your security. So what are some of the options? So Michael talked about MFA for global administrators. If we hit the drop down here, basically gives you an idea of why you need to do this. So enabling MFA for your accounts, prevent those accounts from basically a breach. And if you enable MFA on 5 accounts, admin accounts, your score will go up 50 points. So it's a pretty easy win. The learn more option here will bring up another pop-up window, which will give you a link directly over into that section. So it tells you what your tenants are, or within your tenant, who are the admins, and gives you that ability right there to go enable those controls. And they'll run across here basically what's the action for an account, what's the user impact is low, what's the implementation cost, low, and your overall score. Over to the right is where we see our comparative score, us versus other organizations our size, as well as the average Office 365 score. And each of these, some of these settings in here, you definitely want to take caution and review and make sure you understand what is the impact's going to be within the environment. Like this one says it's a moderate. Rolling out multi-factors to everyone within your organization requires a bit of planning and process around that. So it's not a quick turn it on, let it go. You're going to want to make sure you have documentation. You want to make sure that you're educating your users on how to operate from the MFA perspective, how to handle it on their mobile devices, if they're syncing their phone, email to it, if there's corporate policies around that, making sure that those get updated as well. Another section within here is the score analyzer. The score analyzer basically gives you your trending history of where you've been and has there been some changes within your environment that have either dropped the score or have increased the score. You have some options across the top for setting your range for that. You may not notice if you start making changes an immediate increase. Check back in a couple days. Those scores typically take a 24 to 48 hours to start showing up here. It does show across the different control families how many points you're getting out of each. So from an account perspective, we're getting 35 out of 181 maximum, and we have 6 out of 13 action items to do. And then from a data perspective, we're getting a score of 33 out of 226, and there's a lot of actions remaining to do for that. And then they give you a complete list going down through of what these are, so it's just a slightly different viewpoint. You can get to some of the same options within that. There is an option at the top too, so you can export this information. So if you want to be able to create a report on it or get that action list or the control list and be able to kind of go through and create your own criticality as well as risk balance, you're able to do that and put it right into Excel.
So that all makes sense to everyone, hopefully. So specific controls, we ran through that pretty quickly. We can take some time during the Q&A at the end here if you want to go back and look at some of those specific controls. There's one in particular that we kind of chuckled at. There's a control that says, do not expire passwords. And last week we had the Microsoft security team there and we went, why would you ever recommend not expiring passwords? Best practices has normally been, every quarter you change your password. Well, NIST did a couple of things last year. The National Institute for Standards and Technology, the federal agency, changed a couple of things around passwords last year. One, they said, you no longer have to worry about complexity. As long as they're long, 15 characters or greater, they can all be lowercase. So that was a little surprising. The second thing is they said expiring passwords actually at times can put an organization at risk because users may quickly just create a password. They're not really thinking about it. They've got to do it every quarter. They may degrade the quality of their passwords, and it may put you at more risk. We're a bit skeptical on that one. We actually grade it out in our as a discussion point to have with clients about that component. But that's one of the controls that are in there. There are actually around 105 controls in the control list. And as we mentioned, there are points awarded for each of the controls based on the risk of the control that the control remediates. So multi-factor authentication for global admins, again, it's free. It actually gets you the greatest number of points, 50 points. Multi-factor authentication for users gets you an additional 30 points. So right out of the gate, MFA will get you 80 points on top of the base 30 to get you to 110, so triple digits right out of the gate. Because there's 105 controls and we have a limited amount of time, we can't go through each individual one, but we will make those control lists available to you, and we're happy to follow up with anybody on the call to review those controls and have a conversation about them. So back to the presentation. This is the commercial portion of the presentation, Ben. Are you sharing? So when we've talked to clients about hardening, it's not for the faint at heart, right? There are 105 controls. There needs to be a fairly deep understanding of the impact of the controls. For instance, are you going to disable mail forwarding? And we could, the MDM component, mobile device management component, has about 20 sub-controls that all need to be reviewed. So to that end, some organizations are up to it. Some organizations would like some help, or some organizations would just like to have somebody come in and help them with this. We do have a 365 hardening service that we can come in and enable the do first controls that we talked about for behavioral and configuration controls. That will up your security score by about 233 points, and it varies between 12 to 16 hours of work, just to give you some kind of economies of scale about the effort it takes to enable the baseline do first controls. We are offering some additional incentives around this. We have another service that it's a service that we call shock and awe. It's the ability to come in and take a look at your environment from an ethical hacker's perspective. The security team that we have here at IB4 has a number of penetration testing teams. The offer is to come in and potentially take a look at your environment, spend a half day looking around, lifting the hood, kicking the tires, and determining if there are any exposures. So once we perform the hardening, what can we now see? What can we now do? And how are we mitigating the risk of, say, a phishing campaign? Even if you get credentials, if you've enabled MFA, well, you've mitigated the risk. So we think this is an important component, 365 hardening in your cybersecurity defense, and we want to try to drive this forward a little bit for you. The other thing is the review process. So do you have the staffing and the ability to go in on a regular basis? And in this case, we're not talking about doing it weekly, but having what is similar to in our support program, we have something called a net health check, meaning we're going to go in and look at your backups. We're going to make sure your patches and antivirus are deployed. For security, it's going in and looking at 365 and all of those reports that need to be generated and reviewing them to make certain that a breach isn't underway or imminent, to make sure that the security posture of the organization from a 365 perspective is healthy. So we do offer that as a service. It's a monthly subscription. It's about 4 hours a month of effort on our part, and we will generate a health check report at the end. Now, we've shown you how to do it. So if you have the ability, have at it. It's an important thing to add to your operations, the operational components of the organization, and make certain that you're closing the loop on these controls. So that said, and this is the conclusion of the technical portion of the webinar. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out in the chat window there, and Ben and I will field any questions you have about the controls. And so far, you all understand it. Okay. Give you another second. Looks like everybody's good. Rebecca?
Oh, looks like we just had one come in, actually. Is there a way to add the secure score to the admin panel? Ben, do you know that one?
I don't believe so. I think it has to go right back into the Security and Compliance Center. But I will follow up on that for sure. We'll just verify that.
Any questions on the controls themselves? Ben, why don't you go back to the presentation and just start with the behavioral controls. We're going to scroll through these. I just want to make sure that everybody understands what controls, at least that we designated as do first. Are there any questions about any of the behavioral controls? I'll give you a couple seconds to review those. Okay. And let's go to the configuration controls. So MFA, client rules for forwarding block, set outbound spam notifications. And one of the things to consider when we disabled mail forwarding, besides a checkbox, there are some PowerShell scripts that need to be run in order to fully enable it. So this is where I was talking about sometimes it can be a daunting task to understand all of the tasks that are involved in enabling each of these controls. So if you need help, reach out. Go to the next screen, Ben. So DLP, Advanced Security Management, ATP, the ones, the four at the top are optional components. ATP that Ben talked about is an additional $2 per month to enable that. And then all of the MDM services below. Do you want to set a password, block access, report policy violations, manage email profiles? All of these are a choice as to which you want to enable. And then the final are the review.
One thing I do want to add on here, Michael, is that this section right here, enable advanced threat protection safe links policy. I didn't talk about that at all, and basically what it is it rewrites the, if there's a link within an email, Office 365 rewrites that into a trackable link. So if you do get phished and you need to know who clicked on the link and put in their credentials, it's an actual searchable method to be able to understand who has traveled to that link. And it works across all devices. So you don't just have to be in office, in the office. They could be on a mobile device. They could be anywhere. As long as they click on the link in the email, it will show up.
Thanks, bud. All right, well, thank you very much for attending. We appreciate everybody joining us today. Hopefully this helps you with understanding some additional controls that you can apply to your environment to mitigate what we consider a very high level risk right now to most organizations. One of the things I wanted to close with is we were talking about statistics around phishing campaigns. When we perform phishing campaigns, the organization we use out of the UK It's an international organization, and they maintain metrics on how many people open the email, how many people clicked on the link, how many people enter credentials. The international average for credentials is about 6% of the people actually put their credentials in. In our experience in performing phishing campaigns, we're getting anywhere from 25 to 50% of the users putting in credentials. So just to loop back to identity as being a key to mitigating this risk, it's essential that as you look at these controls, anything that has to do with authentication and authorization mechanisms are really a high priority. Again, thank you very much for joining us today. We're going to let you go now, and appreciate the time you spent with us. Thank you.